What's going on, everybody? Logic's back with another one. Today we are talking about the MSI Ventus RTX 3080. Huge fan, super glad I managed to get this one in. Been waiting a long time. As you can see, it is absolutely beautiful. It is, as you can probably tell already, absolutely massive. This thing is huge. It's 12 inches long, or 305 millimeters, 4.72 inches wide, or 120 millimeters, and 2.24 inches thick, or 57 millimeters. It has absolutely no RGB on it, which is kind of a downside for me, but not really a make or break, obviously. It's absolutely beautiful. The design of it is elegant, yet subtle, simple. It has just enough accents and curves on it. I'm a big fan of MSI's dragon logo. It's debatably my favorite because obviously dragons are awesome. Somebody like me is gonna really love dragons. Love this logo, love the look, I love the simplicity of it. The backplate is absolutely gorgeous, and if you're not using it in a vertical mount, that's primarily what you're gonna see anyways. I'm a huge fan of it. As you can see here, compared to my 1070, it's just gigantic. I mean, it's absolutely huge. It's one of those things that starts to make you wonder, man, is this gonna fit in the case? The good news is, it fits in just about every mid-tower case that's out on the market. It is a 2.5 slot technically graphics card. It's technically a 2.5 slot graphics card. However, it does measure into 3 slots. This card is massive. It does really, really well in performance. The 3 fans on here are absolutely beautiful. I love the look of them. I love the overall design of it. Big fan of the angular cuts into it. I don't feel like it's overdone, which is usually a big problem. It's either underdone or overdone. And I really feel like MSI nailed it here. It's just gorgeous. If you just look at it, it's absolutely beautiful. It does take 2 8-pins. It runs 10 gigs of GDDR6 over a 320-bit bus lane. It does have 3 Displayport 1.4s, one HDMI 2.1. It does do 8K support. It is PCI Express 4.0 capable, which is awesome for a lot of you. Again, fits most of the mid-tower cases. It's quite the step up from an GTX 1070. The 1070 was running Cyberpunk 2077 on 1080p, max settings, no ray tracing obviously, and it was struggling to maintain 35 frames per second in some of the battles and some of the heavy graphic scenes. I went from that to averaging about 45 to 50 frames a second, all max settings with ray tracing and mods turned on. I average about 45 frames a second. It's completely playable, it's completely maxed out, and if I really need the FPS, I jump down to the 1080p, and it still looks really, really good. In fact, Gamers Nexus has an entire video on Cyberpunk 2077 benchmarks and the difference between having DLSS enabled and disabled with ray tracing. I'll link that video down below. It's an amazing video. Shout out to Gamers Nexus for doing all that work. Big fan. Check them out below. And also, Optimum Tech has a great video about undervolting your graphics cards. I'll link that video down below too, because it's one of the first things I did when I got the 3080 was undervolted. I'm still getting the exact same performance, but I dropped about 7 degrees. That's huge. 7 degrees Celsius is a massive, massive drop. It's one of those things. It's the equivalent of making sure you get thermal throttled or don't get thermal throttled. That's the difference. And frankly, for somebody like me who wasn't getting thermal throttled in the first place, it was just really nice to run my graphics card at a cooler threshold, especially since I went from, as you can see, an AIO GTX 1070 to a normal fan-based RTX 3080. It's quite the step up. I was actually CPU bottlenecked for a while here. Stay tuned, because I have a video about why I'm no longer CPU bottlenecked coming soon. The 6700K wasn't doing too bad. It was only bottlenecking a little bit. It was about 3 to 5 frames per second, but that's a huge difference. 3 to 5 frames per second is the difference between something being kind of playable and no longer playable at all. But every other title I throw at it is absolutely max settings, 100 plus frames a second. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, I simply cannot get this thing to struggle in any game except Cyberpunk. Everything I'd have, I can even upscale past 2K resolution just because. It's an absolute monster. The encoder on it's great. I'll do a small breakdown of some benchmarks on the 3080 later. It takes a lot of time for somebody like me that doesn't have the proper software and tools to do benchmarking. So I'll do some generic benchmarks just to show you all kind of the difference between a GTX 1070 and a 3080. I did do a small video about a 6700K and a GTX 1070 in late 2020. We are in 2021 now, and I have a much appreciated upgrade to my rig. We'll check that video out soon. For those of you in the market, I know everything's scalped to death, but this is a beautiful graphics card. It's a great price point if you can get it for MSRP or close to MSRP. This will hold you over for quite some time. It's something that you need to consider. I wouldn't recommend jumping into the 2000 series. Don't give in to the scalpers. And although AMD does offer some really good competitive alternatives, I just still can't recommend it. I had a 6800 XT in my possession. It didn't work for 3 different games. The other games ran fine. It ran just as good as the RTX 3080, but it simply lagged behind in a lot of games, and I wasn't being CPU bottlenecked at that time. So as much as I would love to try to recommend a 6800 XT because most people don't have a problem with it, I just can't justify it. If I had to choose, I'm going to stick with NVIDIA, but NVIDIA has to also be very careful. They're doing some weird things with the pricing of the 3060 and the specs of a 3060 versus the 3060 Ti. And then the 3080 Ti is coming out, which I personally believe was the rumored 20 gig RTX 3080. It wouldn't make sense for them to re-release the same card but with higher bandwidth and not change the name. You could expect a 3080 Super, but I'm just really confused as to where the 3080 Ti is supposed to fit in. There's not really a slot for it, and frankly, I don't know if this is the best move from NVIDIA. I'm going to start having discussions about these kind of things in the future videos where we can actually sit down and start talking tech, and maybe even include some articles from the big boys like Brian P., Gamers Nexus, Optimum Tech, and Hardware Canucks, which are my go-tos, including Linus Tech Tips, for all your information. We have CES going on right now, virtually obviously. It's not really my favorite thing. There has been some cool things released, but I'm not even going to bother covering it because frankly, this year is a little lackluster for me personally in terms of CES, so not really much going on there. I do have a Cyberpunk 2077 video, the reason I'm no longer bottleneck, and a couple other ones in the works for you guys. For now, quick, short, simple video. Look at how absolutely gorgeous this card is. I'm a big fan. If you're in the market, I recommend either picking up a 3060 Ti or a 3080. It's really just the way to go. And if you desperately need a card, do your hardest to try and find one at MSRP. It's entirely worth it. Well, I'm gonna get back to it. Remember, as always, stay calm, conquer all.